if there's any questions, I'll come back on and I can facilitate those for you. So
Okay.
Judy Sims is a writer, leadership consultant, and board certified coach. Clients come to her when they're growing or changing rapidly. The stakes are high and they're facing a lot of complexity, uncertainty, and ambiguity. It's an exciting time, but it can also be overwhelming and it's easy to get stuck from that place. Judy's there to support them so they not only survive but actually thrive within that environment. So that's amazing. So can you give us an example maybe of a client that you work with or that you've helped out of a certain situation? That would be.
As a coach, I can't say
Oh, okay,
names,
sure.
but
An example.
yeah, I can give an example of a company right now that is on the verge of a massive launch that has been delayed for several years. And so they are in that stuck place looking to move forward. And so, yeah, the exciting thing was getting in there and training their top 18 executives all
Wow.
at the same time, plus individually coaching each of those. It's called symmetrical coaching. So you coach everybody at the same time. So everybody ends up with the same leadership vocabulary. And that company, I'm proud to say, has launched, is about to launch. They have set their launch date for Canada Day. So yeah,
That's exciting. Well,
yeah,
good
it's a
for
lot of
you.
fun.
Good for you. So do you help businesses of all sizes, big, larger businesses, smaller businesses?
I do. I do. I have clients, just individuals who come to me all the way up to, the BC government. I can say that they're a client.
Fantastic. All right,
Yeah.
awesome. All right, well, you should put your contact information in the chat, but I'll leave you to it and I'll be back at the end for questions.
Okay, excellent.
Okay,
Thank
thanks,
you.
Judy.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. I'm going to go right into the slides so you can see. And I'm just going to rearrange my screen a little bit because I got a lot of stuff going on right here. So I want to say thank you for having me and welcome. We're going to talk about building resilience today, which is the #1 skill for any leader or entrepreneur. Developing resilience is what gets you through the tough times. So I'm Judy Sims, and I am a leadership coach and trainer who is focused on accelerating talent in organizations. But I haven't always been that. Not too long ago, I was the CEO of a small digital startup called Shopcaster. And about a year into that venture, I found myself feeling terribly, awfully, almost irretrievably stuck. The business just wasn't growing as fast as I wanted it to. In fact, it wasn't actually growing at all. I was failing, and it felt deeply personal, and I didn't have the first clue of what to do about it. And around that time, I remember having lunch with a friend of mine who is also a budding technology CEO. And I told him that I believed my inability to move my company forward was the result of a monumental failure of my character. I just didn't have what it took. And he laughed at first, and then he said that I was being way too hard on myself, and that all I needed to do was have fun experimenting until I found something that worked. And I'll tell you, at that time, I didn't really like that answer because I was looking for the answer. And I wanted that answer to be clear and unambiguous. But my friend knew that for most situations, there really isn't always a clear, unambiguous answer, but rather a range of continuously shifting possibilities that may or may not work out. My friend knew that the world is complex. And he found a way not only to survive the complexity, but to thrive within it, because to him, stuck wasn't personal, it was an adventure. So eventually was able to move my company to an exit, and I began my career as a leadership consultant. But I kind of stayed really fascinated with stuckness, and that's because I saw that same stuckness I was experiencing time and time again in my clients. And like me, they were mystified and they were blaming themselves. I knew my friend couldn't be alone. There must be other leaders who had figured out how to get and stay unstuck despite really difficult conditions. And so I set it upon myself to interview as many of them as I could, and then to take their collective wisdom to come up with a new philosophy of leadership that would help not just my clients, but me also. And so I began the Unstuck Project, and I interviewed 100 people in 35 cities in 12 countries around the world. And I've probably interviewed a few, maybe close to 200 now. It's actually become a hobby of mine. I also dove really deeply into the world of complex system leadership theory and adult life cycle renewal theory. And what emerged from all of this research was a framework for a new kind of leader, what I call an unstuck leader. And this is the book that I wrote about the topic. Now, at the core of these leaders is a willingness to embrace complexity, uncertainty, and ambiguity with equanimity. Now, this isn't really the leadership philosophy that most of us grew up with. Our ideas about leadership were developed in the 20th century world of fossil fuels and mechanized production-oriented businesses where order is the name of the day and certainty is king. But I think we can all agree in the 21st century, that world is dying, and we see before us this new world, one of ideas and knowledge and creativity and innovation, but also one that's growing increasingly more complicated and entangled, and one that is far less predictable. And that really is what makes the big difference between the 20th century and the 21st century. So I want to share a little with you about what I learned about the difference between a stuck leader and an unstuck leader. So for starters, a stuck leader who has been conditioned to seek certainty in business is very attached to that notion. And because of that, when things are uncertain or when they are facing complexity, they start to feel very uncomfortable, and they feel that maybe perhaps complexity in an organization represents a lack of control or a lack of discipline, or perhaps it means somebody's at fault. And from that moment, they decide they must do something about it. And the first thing they usually do is impose a lot of structure in the organization. In my interviews, the most stuck leaders I talked to were the ones who loved top-down authority and top-down decision-making. They also have a tendency to create silos in the organization. So they're deeply uncomfortable with different parts of the organization talking to each other. So if you're in this department, I'm in that department. These leaders are uncomfortable with us talking to each other. And the other thing they are is very opaque about what's going on in the organization. So they don't tell anybody what's going on. And I think the philosophy there is there can be no conflict if nobody really knows what's going on. But at the same time, this can create a vacuum in the organization where people start to feel maybe if they're not telling us what's going on, we're going to make up our own stories about what's going on. And it can lead to a lot of gossip and cynicism in the organization. So what's going on with these leaders is they are prioritizing their own personal comfort over the truth of what's happening around them. And in all of my research, this is the moment we get stuck, as soon as we prioritize comfort over truth. These leaders are in what I call a contractive state. So from this place, they are very turned in, they're self-aware, and that's all they're aware of. They tend to become in this position very defensive, reactive, and judgmental. Think of an armadillo all curled up in a ball where all you see on the outside is armor. That's essentially how these leaders are operating through the world. And you can imagine that's a terrible place to lead from. Unstuck leaders, on the other hand, are perfectly cool with complexity, uncertainty, and ambiguity. In fact, they see those things as an opportunity for exploration. They also have a tendency to be very open to new situations, people, and ideas. They love to see interconnectedness in their organization. So they like to see people from different departments talking to each other and organizing into little constellations of people who come up with solutions and ideas. And they tend to be very transparent about what's going on in the organization, both positive and negative. They believe everybody has a right to know what's going on. So what's going on with these leaders is they're prioritizing the truth of what's happening around them over comfort. And they are in what's called an expansive state. So this is the key to resilience, is learning how to be expansive. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So expansive leaders, when you're in an expansive state, you are grounded in solid core values of who you are, yet open to new ideas, people, and situations. So there's a grounding and are reaching. This is what makes them such special leaders. From this state, they experience heightened creativity, energy, and joy. Think of a dancer. She can't do this amazing fouette turn that she's doing here if her shoulders are all hunched in and her core muscles are disengaged. She would just lose her balance and fall over. But instead, you can see her core is very engaged and her chest is open, her shoulders are down, and that's what's enabling her to do her thing. Same goes for athletes. Shoulders down, chest open, core engaged creates a fluidity that improves their performance. Same goes for you, both physically and metaphorically. When you're grounded in a solid core, strong core, yet open, you too will find that your performance increases, gets better, and is more joyful for you in the same process. So how do we do this? How do we enter this expansive state? Well, the first thing you need to do is show up. And I might sound a little cute saying that, but I actually mean it. Very few of us actually show up for our lives and for work as our true authentic self on a day-to-day regular basis. Some of us put on a mask to come to work. Some of us are uneven in the way we present ourselves. So it's really important that we be consistently authentic in our lives. And the first thing we need to do to achieve that is to make friends with fear. Now, fear arises from our need for certainty, and there's nothing really wrong with certainty. It's just the need to feel safe, secure, and comfortable. It can keep us from making a lot of dumbass decisions, but at the same time, if we get over-attached to our need for certainty, it can make us do things like stay in a job or a relationship for way too long, or it can make us be reluctant to put ourselves out there, or it can make us avoid even reasonable amounts of risk. So you can see that certainty is a really tricky thing. So to really understand it, we need to look at this totally accurate and very specific model of a brain that I have drawn for you. It's based on the work of a neuroscientist called Paul MacLean. And he studied, among many things, how our brains evolved. So from his words, the first part of our brain to evolve was this part, the reptilian brain, also sometimes called the lizard brain. It is involved in basic functions. It is basically just keeping the lights on. And it wants you to breathe. It wants you to eat. That's the kind of stuff it's thinking about. It tells you to move from extreme temperatures towards more pleasant temperatures. And this part of our brain is often blamed for the feelings of fear that we have in our minds. So you might have heard somebody say, like, I would write that book or I would launch that company, but my lizard brain won't let me. Has nothing to do with your lizard brain. The real culprit is this part of your brain, the paleo-mammalian brain, or the limbic system, which is where our emotions reside. And the emotion it likes best is fear. It's constantly making predictions about bad things that could happen to you. That's the job of the limbic system. So it's always looking for a tiger to jump out of the woods to attack you. But the problem is, because it's not very evolved, it can't tell the difference between a tiger about to attack you and the danger of giving a business presentation. It perceives the danger of both at the same level. And that's why those fight or flight responses kick in when you feel nervous about something. You get the pounding heart and the dry mouth and all of those things. It's because your brain can't tell the difference between, physical danger and emotional danger. Finally, there is the neo-mammalian part of our brain, or our outer cortex, which is where our personality resides. It's where we do our thinking, and it's where language comes from. So think of it this way. You've got your reptilian brain. It's lizard-like. It's just keeping the lights on. Then you've got the troublemaker part of your brain, the limbic system, which is monkey-like. So it's making predictions. It's shooting off in all different directions. If you've ever heard someone who's into meditation talk about taming their monkey brain or controlling their monkey brain, this is what they're talking about. And then finally, there's the outer cortex, which is the part of your brain that makes you human. So when you take a look at this diagram, what you see is that actually a good chunk of our brains are devoted to survival and not truth. And that's why it's so important for us to really get a hold on our need for certainty. Now, I will say before I move on that I have recently completed a full course taught by actual neuroscientists about the brain, and they would probably all want you to know that your brain does not, in fact, look like this, and it would be impossible to reach into a brain and dissect out the limbic system and hold it in your hand. It's actually distributed across the whole brain. But those same neuroscientists would also agree that this is a good way for introducing you to how your brain operates and how sometimes it can get in your way. All right, so we're going to get cool with uncertainty. We're going to deal with our fears. And the first thing we need to do is get curious about them. So when you feel fear arising, rather than getting hooked and running off with the fear, take a moment to say, oh, look, I'm feeling afraid. Gee, I wonder why, what's causing that to rise up? Am I being triggered by something? Have I experienced this kind of fear in the past? Just really kind of, you're afraid. How fascinating. Start looking at it that way. Next, be vulnerable. This is a tricky one. So spend some time with someone you trust and have a good conversation about the fear that you're feeling. Because what you might get back is, you know what, that's just your monkey brain talking and there's nothing to worry about. Or you might get back, yeah, that's scary. You should be afraid. And that may not be the answer you're looking for, but at least you'll know. And then finally, and I think this is the most important one, you have to stop identifying with the fear. What do I mean by that? So the next time you feel fear rising in you, instead of telling yourself, I'm afraid, simply say, there is fear. What this does is it creates space between you and your emotion, so you don't have to get hooked. It's not that you are the fear, it's that there is the presence of fear in your mind and body. I learned this technique from a nun called Pema Chodron, and she has a really fun way of dealing with any negative emotions, so not just fear, like shame, anger, all those kinds of emotions. She simply says, there you are again, my old friend. And she knows that if you try to stuff down the negative emotions, which is what we always do, right? Like suck it up, stuff down that fear, it just comes back bigger. So she allows its presence. She allows it to be there, but she doesn't get hooked in it. And the reason this works is that we're actually training our nervous systems to not overreact to negative emotions. We know now that those are just created by the limbic system to keep us safe. It's making predictions, it's trying to help, but we don't have to run off with those emotions every time. So once we're making friends with fear, it takes a while. Once we do that, we start to feel like maybe we can handle those emotions. The next thing we need to do to show up is to wrestle with our ego, which is also known as our need for significance. So like certainty, significance isn't inherently bad. What it is the need to feel like we matter in the world and to be validated as a person. So that's it. It's a nice thing. But the problem occurs when we get over attached to that need for significance. And then we start to operate from an ego place. And what makes that problematic is it kind of puts us in this me bubble, right? So we get this terrible, terrible tunnel vision where we're only thinking about us and we're filtering everything that we experience through how it affects us without seeking to understand how it affects others or the world as a whole. So it creates these terrible blind spots. It can also, which is, by the way, very dangerous in business, as I'm sure you know, you don't want to have these kinds of blind spots. It can make us feel insatiable, so nothing is ever enough. So if you have a house, you want a bigger house. If you have a car, you want a nicer car. If you get applause from the audience, you want a standing ovation. And the problem with this insatiability is it can leave you feeling very empty inside, which makes you crave more significance, kind of a vicious circle you get going there. And finally, it can result in pointless competitiveness. So I'm not talking about good competitiveness, because that's in business. We all need that. And I'm really glad all the vaccine companies were very competitive last year so that we end up where we are now. I'm talking about the pointless kind where it doesn't even make sense. You're just competing because you're feeding the ego. And again, that can leave you feeling very empty. And this is energy draining. So at the time when you need the most energy during complexity, uncertainty, and ambiguity, you're letting it go through these bad ego habits. Now, fortunately, it is actually fairly simple to tame your ego. All you have to do is take all those emotions and channel them into positive things for the world. So you want to do big things, just make sure those things are also great things. And another part of that is getting really clear on your core values. So this is how you know what's great to do because it's aligned with who you are and what you believe in. It's aligned with the qualities of life and character that are most important to you. Values act as a North Star. When you are in alignment with your values, you feel solid as a person. This is the grounding part of the expansive state, is being grounded in those core values. If you're not acting in accordance with your values, you are essentially betraying yourself, and you know it, and it feels terrible. And those bad habits of ego and fear start to arise again. So right now you might be a little uncomfortable thinking like, oh God, what are my values? Which is fine. Most people don't spend a lot of time thinking about their values. So I'll give you some clues about where they might be. So your values are in things you like to do, because if you like to do them, probably aligned with who you are. They are in times when you were at your best. So if you find yourself ever entering a state of flow, whatever that is somehow aligned with who you are. It's in what others say about you, because you are to some extent living your values at any time. And so they see that even if you're not fully aware of it. They're in what you were like as a kid. So when you were 8, 9, 10 years old, you were your full authentic self, day in, day out. You didn't know anything else. They're in what makes you successful. So if you're good at something, chances are it's aligned with who you are. And they're in what you yearn for and what you'd like more of in your life. So the way you find what your core values are is make lists of all these things and then search for the commonalities. And usually what happens is 3 to 5 kind of arise as the most important to you, and those are your core values. And it's living within those core values in that expansive state that allows you to prioritize the truth of what's happening around you over your own personal comfort. This is the essence of resilience, is being able to do this. All right. So you know how to show up. You've shown up. You're there in your authentic self. The next thing you have to do is start to look around you and understand other people. And that means you have to stop your navel gazing. We all have a tendency to do this. So omphalloskepsis is the formal word for navel gazing. I bet you didn't know that that was a word. And you can look at these gentlemen here and you can see they're in the physical representation of a contractive state, turned in, referring to themselves, only thinking about themselves. And in business, that is an extraordinarily, in life in general, is an extraordinarily risky behavior. And the reason for that is because when you are fully focused on yourself, you're not understanding what's going on around you. You have a lack of comparative input, so you don't know where you stand versus others. So in business, again, that's a dangerous thing where you don't know where you stand versus your competitors. This can lead you to chase a lot of red herrings and waste a lot of time and energy, as well as make some faulty and potentially damaging predictions. So I will tell you this, you absolutely have to lift your head up out of that contractive state. This is why expansiveness is so important, because the most successful people I know don't set the direction of their lives so much as they listen for it. And that means not just understanding you and showing up, but understanding all the people around you and the systems and institutions that they operate within. And I'll come back to this slide in a little bit. So you have learned to show up, and you're starting to understand the people and institutions and situations that are going on around you. Now you're ready to let go of the things that aren't working. The first thing we need to let go of always is stability. And this is the scary thing, but this is that embracing complexity, uncertainty, and ambiguity. And the reason we need to give up and let go of stability is because things that are really stable have a tendency to be also very rigid. And things that are rigid are fragile and they break. And that is the opposite of resilience, obviously. So we need to trade that rigidity for flexibility. And the writer Carol Dweck, in her book Mindset, talks about this in a really great way. So she talks about the world of fixed traits. So that's certainty and significance. and how that's all about proving yourself and validating yourself and pushing your views out onto the world, as opposed to the other world of changing qualities, complexity, uncertainty, ambiguity, and a world where you develop yourself. So that's my CEO friend saying, just experiment until you find something that works. For him, that was how you do business. It wasn't personal. It was an adventure. All right, so the next thing you need to let go of is being right. It's a tough one because we all really, really like being right. But again, it's a product of our need for certainty and significance. So we need to shift that ego into curiosity mode. So we need to just, instead of feeling that really strong desire to make our views known and make our points known, to actually take a step back and ask questions first, to give our thoughts after asking all the questions so that we have all the information. And then finally, we have to let go of the things in our life that are ending. So we can tend to be very clingy in the world. So we can cling to a job that isn't right for us anymore, or a relationship that isn't right for us anymore. We can cling to an idea of who we are and not allow that to shift or change, which is a great tragedy. We can cling to even a client who has, they're more trouble than they're worth, let's say, and then kind of, outlive their usefulness. So we have to learn to trade that grasping for accepting. And all of this comes from that grounding in core values, yet openness to new ideas, people, and situations. All right, so you have shown up. You have learned to understand what's going on around you. You're let go of the things that aren't working in your life. You are now ready to co-create a new reality. So if you take only one thing away from this entire session, it should be this: stop trying to do everything yourself. And the reason for that is because the world is far too complex for any single individual to fully understand. So let me put it this way. When I think about complexity, I like to think of a cake. I like to think of cake anyway, but this cake in particular for now. When we look at this cake, we don't see flour and eggs and sugar and butter, and if we're lucky, cocoa. All we see is a cake. We don't see the ingredients that went into it. We don't see the processes of measuring it and mixing them up. We don't see the interactions that happened in the oven when the batter transformed into fluffy deliciousness. All we see is the cake. But what this cake actually is the product of a complex system of interconnected ingredients, processes, and interactions. And so is the rest of the world. So when you meet a new person, or if you start a job in a new organization, or if you have a customer experience with a company, you don't see all the underlying ingredients, processes, and interactions that led to the entity that is before you. All you see is the results. And that's the same for all of us. So we're back to this slide again. Each of us is influenced. We are all the product of the processes, ingredients, and interactions that are going on around us. And we are influenced by the family institutions we grew up in, the communities we grew up in, the government institutions we grew up in, and the social norms and historical forces that are going on around us at all times. And in turn, we are influencing those things as well. So when you think of it this way, you see it's a beautiful mess. And that's why it is absolutely crazy to try to make major decisions on your own. And when we are engaged in co-creation, when we allow other people, when we have that openness and we allow other people who come into our lives, we get more perspectives and possibilities. We get more alternatives. And 9 times out of 10, we're going to reach a better solution than we would have on our own. Now, I will tell you that I am not a big fan of co-creation. I'm not good at it because I am an introvert. And so I like to sit alone in a room and solve problems. And so that's why this last step is so important. We must practice. The act of leadership and expansion is a practice. So just as you might have a meditation practice or a professional practice or a spiritual practice, leadership and expansiveness are a practice too. So it's going to be really critical for you to put processes in place that enable you to practice and be consistent with what you're doing. I'm going to skip through these slides because I'm running out of time, and I will just show you this. If you want to learn more about how to build a practice, 1, try mindfulness. There's some great stuff online that you can look at. too. You can talk to me at judysims.com, or you can pick up my book on Amazon. So thank you so much. I just barely scraped in there with the time, but I can see that we don't have any pressing questions.
Hey, Judy.
Hi.
That was great. Thank you so much. I always learn so much from all of our speakers. So I'm kind of lucky. I get to attend all these things and learn all the. I feel like I've educated myself so much over over the course of this pandemic. So, but thank you. Yeah, there's if anyone has any questions, you could throw them in. But yeah, you squeezed in there at the 2:50.
I was watching the clock carefully.
Yeah, maybe your contact information, maybe your website, or if you have a LinkedIn profile or something like that, if anyone wants to contact you directly. Awesome.
Perfect.
I know some people get shy on our platform. It's hard to get people going and engaged. I think people are getting used to the idea. Your hair's so blonde in your picture there.
Yeah, well, it's blonde on the bottom.
Yeah,
this is 6 months of roots.
Well, it's starting to be bad again, but I snuck mine in just before they closed everything down again.
Yeah.
I was like literally the day before. So
I had an appointment the day they shut down, so I haven't had mine done since September. It's brutal.
Oh no, I know it's hard, right? But we could be experiencing a lot more difficult problems. So yes. I think we're good. Well, thank you so much, Judy. I appreciate you being here. So our next session will start, I think, at 2:55, if I'm not mistaken. I don't have my schedule in front of me, but thanks so much for your presentation. We have 2 more sessions that will begin, and then we have our panel starting at 3:30. So we're really looking forward to the rest of the conference. But thank you so much again, Judy, for your time. I know it takes a while to get all the content together, and we really appreciate your expertise, and thank you for being here.
Thanks so much.
All right. Have a great afternoon, Judy.
You too. Bye-bye.